The top of the pyramids are missing, and if you understand what these capstones symbolized, I think you'll agree that this symbolism that they've gone missing is incredible, as it's so perfect that they're the literal and metaphorical peak of Egyptian culture, and the fact that they're fulfilling both those roles at the same time is precisely what's so great about their worldview. I think comedic philosophy, as represented in their myths and stories, is one of the richest and healthiest in all human history, especially if you can see through what might seem like odd imagery at first. So the fact that that richness of the ancient Kemitic civilization lays in ruins, and their precious Benbenite capstones are gone, is just like something out of their own myths. In the sense that it is describing a truth in that common sense of the word, there was a capstone and now it is missing, but there is also a timeless aspect to this that brings it beyond a mere set of facts describing the world, and it becomes more akin to wisdom. It's seeing reality is filled with metaphor and symbolic, and events are playing out on multiple realms, connected to the timeless laws of reality itself. So let's understand what the Benben is and what it symbolized. It occupies a central place in ancient Egyptian mythology and philosophy, and was not seen as just some decoration or a mere piece of architecture. It embodied the very moment of creation and the link between divinity and earthly realms. In myth, the Benben was the first land that emerged from the chaotic waters of pre-creation, a sacred mound upon which the creator god stood, and they were replicating that in the cap of their pyramids and on the top of obelisks, all symbolizing this moment of creation from nothingness, and humanity's ability to be at this intersection of mundane physical reality while having a spirit nature of the same metaphysical type of being as the gods themselves, as spirit predated the material creation. In every aspect of their worldview, even if you agree with some scholars that think it was just pharaohs at first, but all acknowledge that eventually everyone could become one with the spiritual body of the gods. The Egyptians' reverence for the Benben reflects their holistic worldview. They did not separate the symbolic from the literal. To them, physical forms like the Benben, the pyramids, and indeed the whole world were infused with divine presence and meaning. Existence was the body of the creator god, a dynamic, divine, living cosmos, more of a verb than a noun. Especially in the Heliopolitan tradition, Benben is the name of the primeval mound that first arose out of Nun, the formless waters of chaos. Before creation, there was only the dark, endless waters of Nun, until at the first dawn a mound of earth, the Benben, emerged. Upon this mound, the creator deity Atum appeared, bringing the first act of creation. If you saw the last video on the earliest of Egyptian gods, we went through the process of how it started from local gods, and with the unification of Egypt, you got Ptah and Memphis, and this revolution in thought that looked for the primordial creator, one who created out of nothingness with his own mind and speech. And while these traits would be applied to different gods, mostly Atum and Ra, and you get this merge of Atum-Ra or even Ta-Ra, they didn't seem to be so hung up on the different names for this creator god. The point was that there was some grand architect of the universe who was self-created and came out of nothing, and that spot from which he emerged was the Benben. If you think about creation coming into a void at a single point and expanding out, it would be in a cone shape. So maybe this is the idea of it expanding out to create everything, which you see in modern Big Bang timeline representations. The Benben signifies the moment of Genesis, the creation from chaotic nothingness, just pure potentiality, to ordered existence. And this mythic mound was not an abstract concept, but was actively worshipped at Heliopolis, called in the Egyptian language Inu or On. It was the city of the sun, where the sacred Benben stone was kept in the temple of Ra. The Egyptian texts even refer to Atum himself as, quote, rising up as the Benben stone in the mansion of the phoenix at On, equating the god with this first land. In other creation centers, remember often each city or nome would have its own local tradition, with the idea of a primeval hill being throughout. At Memphis, for example, you have either Ptah or the earth god Tatenin, which just means the rising land, and personified the primeval mound that initiated creation. And we can read directly from the hymn to Amun, quote, he who has given shape to himself, his form is unknown, that beautifully shimmering color, which has become a beautiful but secret form, the one who gave shape to himself and who did create himself. The 8 gods were your manifestations, before them you alone have been. Your body was made secret to the ancients, you, who has hidden yourself as Amun, as the first among the gods. You assumed the form of Tenten, to give shape to the first gods of the primeval era. The Aeneid together were in your members, and in your form were all the gods united. Your first form by which you have begun was Amun, namely, he who hides his name from the gods. So Benben and 1010 referenced there is the same thing, and whether it's Ta, Atum, Ra, or Amun, they're all doing the same thing. No matter the city, the core idea was the same. All life owed its origins to the emergence of that first mound, the Benben, which came out of the void, which is a simultaneous emanation from the god that created himself. It established the foundation on which the gods could act and life could unfold. And they start connecting this to other real-world phenomena. Connected with the first sunrise, the Benben at Heliopolis was so high up that if you lived in this area, it would be the first thing that you see being hit by the sun's rays. Since, spoiler alert, we live on a round Earth, so things higher up get hit by the sunlight first, and so as you saw this light up, you would be reminded of its symbolic role as the Benben stone being the dawn of creation. And of course, the most grand display of this would be on top of the pyramids. The tip of each pyramid, in English called a pyramidion, and what the Egyptians called the Benbenet, was designed on the idea of that primordial mound. While the entire pyramid itself was just an extension of the Benben, it was actually the capstone that was the most sacred piece. Many of these capstones were crafted of polished stone or even plated in precious metals so that it would glisten in the sunlight. Archaeological evidence and some surviving accounts say that they were frequently gilded with gold or electrum, turning them into these brilliant beacons at dawn. The reflective capstones catching the sun's rays symbolized the sun god Ra landing upon the pyramid, just as he first illuminated the primeval mound. The design was deeply cosmological. By crowning their pyramids with the Benben stone, the Egyptians tied each royal tomb to the moment of creation, as if each pyramid was a new primordial mound for the pharaoh's spirit to inhabit. The pyramid, with its Benben on top, became this portal or connection to the heavens, believing that the apex served as a conduit between the earth and the sky, focusing spiritual energy and enabling the pharaoh's soul to ascend to join the gods. It is not just a pretty decoration on top, it completed the very purpose of the pyramids, signifying the pharaoh's tomb as a place of rebirth, linking the pharaoh with the creator god's first appearance on the Benben, which is reenacted each day with Ra's daily sunrise. The pyramids at Giza and elsewhere, all shining with their Benbenet capstones, embodied the idea that each departed king would rise again, like the sun on the first mound. Even obelisks are just miniature forms of this. Seen as sunlight made solid in stone form, they're covered in depictions of the life-giving rays of the sun coming to us. All these pyramidal forms reinforce a single metaphysical theme: creation renewed and divine light manifest in stone. What's so frustrating with some of the more popular theories that the pyramids were machines is that there is such a push to think of it in terms of post-industrial machinery, that the pyramids must be power plants or there's some other purely physical mechanism. But it really shows just how incapable a lot of modern materialist thinkers are at understanding the comedic worldview. Ironically, the Egyptians would probably agree, of course it is a machine, but it's a physical device that is meant to do something to the metaphysical aspect of the pharaoh. A human being is just a fleshy machine, bones and blood and skin, a mechanistic body, but also with a soul. But even describing that as two different things, the body and soul dichotomy, the body-soul distinction, is a deeply entrenched cultural programming we all have from modern philosophies and dualistic worldviews. But all you gotta do is look at how many parts of the soul did the Egyptians believe in, and the most common response you'll get is that there are 7 parts. But the first one mentioned is the Ket, which is the physical body. There are parts of your soul that are not even felt or experienced as part of you, per se. Like how the Ib, or heart, is this sort of consciousness that knows everything you have done and can even snitch on you during the weighing of your soul in the afterlife. A part of you can testify against you, and many of these aspects are not under your conscious control. The Ba is what most moderns would identify with. Your day-to-day personality and emotional state, your free will would be exerted here. But there are these other aspects that can operate in different ways, sometimes against you or even in a sort of parallel universe existing alongside you, being positively or negatively impacted by offerings and magic. But things done across all 6 aspects affect each other, even if not perceived what we would call consciously, not perceived by your Ba. And the Ak is a new state of being that you can achieve if you pass the judgment, if you are judged to be living in accord with Ma'at, or the divine will and order, what we might think of as logos, as having emanated from the creator god. And again, this view of a person is just another example of something that's consistent throughout all comedic philosophy, that there's no distinction between what we would call the physical and metaphysical, Existence is the creator god, and so the body is a physical machine, but which affects other soul parts and vice versa. And so the pyramids too are a machine, but in the sense of being a new vehicle for transforming the pharaoh's full being, mummified body and all, putting it through this intersection of creation, as if the pyramids and through the Benben stone are mimicking creation. The pharaoh becomes the new Atum, a creator of a new universe. He joins in and becomes a creator himself, as if the whole pyramid was to be the start of a new universe. And again, no matter which nome you called home, Kemites would see the physical world, the gods, and symbolic meanings as inseparably interwoven. All things were understood as parts of the divine order and parts of God's being. A clear example of this comes from Memphis theology, where the creator god Ta is said to encompass all of creation. An inscription on the Shabaka stone proclaims Ta as, quote, "He who has made all and created the gods, from whom everything came forth, food, provisions, divine offerings, all good things." In other words, everything in the world was viewed as coming into existence through Ta's divinity. The text concludes that, quote, "Ta is the fountain of life for the gods and all material realities." It's a remarkable statement of divine immanence. The Egyptians conceived of their creator as not distant, but a being whose ka, or life force, permeated everything in creation. In this Memphite view, one could almost say that everything was Ta, or at least of Ta, since all forms, gods, humans, animals, foods, and objects issued forth from just his thought and word. Because of this outlook, symbols were not merely signs, they were manifestations of the reality they signified. The Egyptians built their temples as microcosms of the universe, making architectural features serve a symbolic and literal function in recreating the universe. Like when temple sanctuaries were raised slightly above the ground to represent the primeval mound, and the surrounding enclosure walls were often designed with a wavy pattern to represent the waves of Nun, the chaotic waters, thus showing that those waters are being held back by the order of creation within. It's very easy to see how this would align with modern physics. I'm not saying they had the same technology or instruments to determine this, but on the standard current view, the universe, even a multiverse, could be seen as a space, a sort of bubble of creation, by definition coming out of non-creation. And if you want to be pure reductionist, everything just comes down to quantum foam, this state of undulating pure potential, which whenever you try and represent this visually, you're going to have something that looks a lot like the gentle waves, the ups and downs, the peaks and valleys of the ocean surface. And so these temples are trying to get across the idea that there was nothingness, pure chaos, being held back by the forces of creation. Each morning when the priest opened the shrine of the god inside, it was not just a ritual, but a reenactment of the first sunrise. The deity took the position of the creator god, and the world was renewed for that day. All the elements of the temple, from the lotus-shaped columns, evoking the plants that sprang from the primordial mound, there are also this beautiful explosion out of dark, mucky waters, popping into this other realm, the flowers not underwater but in the air, and seeming to strive for that pure golden goodness of the sunlight, willing itself out of the mud, if you will. And you can see the symbolism in the pylons at the entrance, which are shaped like the hieroglyph for the horizon. It's all coming together to merge myth with reality. This is part of why I mentioned in the intro that I see their worldview as incredibly healthy. It is the idea that humans are co-workers with the Creator, who is both animating existence, but also with a proactive aspect that we too are supposed to positively transform the world around us, to keep expanding that bubble of creation, to take chaos and make it productive, and most importantly is that it's not just a one-time thing, but a daily act. We are to grow and maintain an existence that keeps getting better for us over time, going from the void of nothingness to the joys of human life, while remembering that chaos is always pushing against the walls, in the form of famine or hippos, and these things are best overcome by having a society that recognizes those threats and comes together to overcome them as a community. And we can test that worldview by seeing that people end up living out these myths, become one of the most impressive creators in all human history. So no matter the temple and whatever the name of the local supreme god, worshippers were walking into a space that was simultaneously physical and spiritual. The temple was the universe in miniature, and you were standing on a floor that was the Benben rising from chaos. This integration went beyond architecture. Statues of gods and temples were not art representing a deity figuratively, but when ritually animated, they were the god's actual presence dwelling in that form. And likewise, the pharaoh was not just a political ruler using religious symbolism. In early times, he literally was Horus reincarnated, or later he was the divine son of Ra, when Ra coupled with a female priest. And there was no separation of this. He was both a human and a divine being meant to uphold cosmic order. But he was just the most obvious or powerful of humans. Every human was supposed to take part in this process. The Egyptians saw the well-being of the land as dependent on maintaining this sacred order of Ma'at. Every ritual, offering, and recitation had a real effect on sustaining creation. A haunting instruction from the Egyptian wisdom texts warns of the tangible impact of neglecting ritual. Quote, "If the loaves are few on their altars, the same will happen in the whole land, and few will be the food for the living." The temple sacrifice acts like a canary in the coal mine. The priests will first see that the sacrifices are dwindling, and these could be the first sign that famine was coming, and so they can warn Pharaoh about this. And without that distinction between the symbolic and literal, in their worldview, for whatever reason, Ma'at was not being satisfied, because they were not able to provide these offerings. Both gods and Egyptians would starve, and so they can hopefully correct course as soon as possible. It also had this psychological effect of externalizing the motivation. Just as someone will often work harder for someone else than they would for themselves, be that for your boss at work or jumping to help some family member, this idea of temple sacrifices can of course go bad, with priests getting fat and happy from the offerings of the poor and suffering temple goers. But any system can go bad. The goal of this worldview has a practical effect even from a secular angle, that if the people feared the scant offerings would offend the great gods, then they are more likely to make sure that they develop systems that ensure this would never happen. Often people need something greater than themselves to motivate them. And so it works like a canary in a coal mine, this early alert system that if people do not have excess food for the gods, then something is going wrong, and this must be addressed before the people go hungry next. Because the Egyptians viewed their world as infused with divine order and life, their understanding of existence and purpose was oriented around maintaining and participating in creation. Life was the gift of the gods and sustained by these living, animating gods. The role of humans, especially the pharaoh, but by extension everyone, was to uphold Ma'at, the principle of truth, justice, and cosmic harmony established at creation. And this was maintained each day, just like the sun would rise and set each day. And this cyclical renewal meant that the universe had to be continuously kept in balance against the forces of chaos, known as Isfet. Both humans and gods were constantly at war with Isfet. Divine order was something that was maintained. The humans tilled the soil and managed the Nile's flood in accordance with Ma'at, and they performed rituals that mirrored the gods' primordial actions. Existence, or reality to an Egyptian, was fundamentally good and meaningful, because it was the realm where Ma'at could flourish. But that didn't mean that it was without stakes or that everything was predetermined. Each individual needed to fulfill their role in the divine order. The human purpose was therefore service to the divine and preservation of the cosmic order. Kingship was the clearest expression of this. The pharaoh was not just a political leader, but the linchpin in creation stability. As a text from the Reign of a New Kingdom pharaoh explains, Ra himself, quote, has placed the king on earth forever, in order that he may judge mankind and satisfy the gods, establish Ma'at, and annihilate Isfet. In other words, the king's purpose was to perpetuate creation by upholding Ma'at, this concept that means order and justice and truth, in repelling Isfet, chaos, injustice, and the lie. He did this by performing temple rituals, making offerings to nourish the gods, building monuments aligned with cosmic purpose, and governing justly so that human society reflected divine harmony. Common people also had duties to live ethically in Ma'at, to honor the gods and ancestors, and to assist in temple cults as needed, which included donations, public service, and pilgrimage. Even craft work and art were sacred callings, like a sculptor carving a statue of Ptah was helping the god manifest, literally furthering creation by giving form to the divine. Just as we have all those different aspects of the soul put into our physical body, that body makes us more effective in this material realm. Because the Egyptians saw every aspect of their world, the sky, earth, stars, Nile, animals, all as deities or the emanations of or controlled by deities, to live was to constantly engage with the divine. Birth, growth, death, flooding seasons, sunrise, all were woven into myths and sacred narratives. As the pharaoh was to maintain Ma'at on this realm of creation, in a worldview where all things were energies or emanations of that original creator, the one who established this simultaneous physical and spiritual existence, the pharaoh could live on and continue to push Ma'at into existence in new ways, into new realms. The pyramids were not built solely as royal tombs. They were conceived as cosmic engines of rebirth. In both their form and function, they were meant to represent and accomplish the renewal of life in the context of the Egyptian worldview. Firstly, their form was inherently symbolic. Each pyramid was a giant Benben, the primordial mound. And by constructing that shape, the Egyptians were ritually recreating the first hill of creation, coming out of that sacred desert plateau. The 4 sloping faces of the pyramid, perfectly oriented to the cardinal directions, converged upward, suggesting the sun rays descending to earth, while simultaneously being the path that the soul would take to heaven. Light rays down, soul rises up to the sun. The inclusion of text and artwork inside some pyramids, like the pyramid texts that are inscribed into the walls of the pyramid of King Unas and others, they make this purpose explicit. They write out spells and guides for the deceased king to ascend to the sky and take his place among the imperishable stars, or to sail with Ra in the solar boat. In essence, the pyramid was a deification machine. With the Benben capstone on top, the pyramid connected to the creative power of the sun, and with the king's body and magical texts inside, it gave him everything he needed to transform and be reborn as a god. In Heliopolis, there was an ancient text that invokes the king to, quote, rise up as the Benben, linking the king directly with Atum's own emergence on the primordial mound. The pyramid would enable this rising, becoming the new creator god of a new creation. And it also served the purpose to ensure eternal order by divinizing the king. Because Pharaoh's spirit had to join the gods, it all worked to uphold Ma'at, this divine order. A successful royal ascent meant that the king became an Ak, described as an effective spirit who could intercede for Egypt and help maintain the cosmic cycle. The entire pyramid complex was a hub where heaven and earth met for the benefit of all, and the pyramid was thought to confer blessings. Its very shape held down the chaotic forces, just like how the Benben subdued Nun's waters, and its peak channeled the life-giving power of the sun onto Egypt. And so, like I mentioned, it's funny that these other theories want to point to aliens or that they're giant power plants. And it's sad that it's true in a much deeper way. Even conventional researchers say you could look at these as cosmic batteries, sustaining the divine energy of the land. And that idea is consistent with the Egyptian view of form and function coincide, and that there's not this sharp dualism. Physical things and spiritual energies are not completely separated. That's why it's comically simplistic to just view the pyramids as materialistic energy sources, like they're just batteries for cool tech like laser tools to carve vases, or maybe to power their UFOs. The reality is a much more holistic and healthy view, but it's also literally true. I've seen sources that say that tourism to visit these sites account for anywhere from 8 to as much as 24% of the modern Egyptian economy. But of course, it wasn't just about making material needs meet by impressing foreigners for these grand displays, but it's a monument to human potential. This worldview that didn't see humans as fallen or inherently flawed. These are our people who are sometimes critiqued by other contemporaries in ancient times as being uniquely superstitious, and yet they pull off some of the most impressive engineering feats of all time, without viewing themselves as living in a cold, dead, meaningless universe. They had a rich spiritual tradition and a rich philosophical and scientific tradition. What is clear from inscriptions is that the Egyptians intended the pyramid to prolong the creative act forever, by emulating the form of the Benben and dramatizing the king's resurrection as a new Atum or a star. They renewed creation at the royal level, just as the farmer would make sure that the next generation of crops is continued, or the next generation of cattle. The pharaohs were constantly feeding into this creator god energy and rejuvenating the cosmos, as divine order was something that was maintained, not a one-time thing. And now you'll see why it's a truly symbolic loss, a great metaphor for the fall of the golden age of the Kemites. None of the great pyramids have their Benben stone. Some believe it was due to a variety of elements, be it the chaotic power of earthquakes and the sand that seeks to erode and hide the great works of mankind. But the most impactful of all was the abandonment of divine order, a people that no longer sought to uphold Ma'at, the death spiral of poor leadership and growing immorality amongst the citizens. When the Nile Valley entered periods of economic decline and political fragmentation, looting of ancient sites became common. Many pyramids, including those at Giza, were quarried for their limestone blocks, which were repurposed in later Islamic-era constructions. Many of the stones used in pyramids were now used to build houses for the Abrahamic God, of those people who came from the deserts and were of the Abrahamic tradition, whose prophet Moses once said to the pharaoh of his time, recorded in Exodus 7:16, quote, "Yahweh, the God of the Hebrews, has sent me to say to you, let my people go, so that they may worship me in the desert." We can look at scholars like M. David Litwa pointing out the parallels with Yahweh and Set, the god of the deserts, storms, disorder, violence, and foreigners. Millennia later, this religion and its worldview would take over the entire Fertile Crescent, from the once great Sumer in Iraq to the Anatolian and Levant regions and over into the lands of the Kemites. A view that now said that the pharaohs and the Kemites more broadly were all deluded by evil demonic forces. Though this was only the final blow in a fall that came from the acts of the Egyptians themselves, with internal strife, a fall which was already in effect by the time of the ancient Greeks, but now completely taken over by these once desert-dwelling foreigners. Their ultimate fate is just like something out of one of their myths, what they were warning of if Set could take over. The capstones, being highly visible and possibly made of precious materials, would have been prime targets. By the time of Herodotus' visit around 450 BCE, the Great Pyramid was already missing its smooth casing stones and may have already lost its capstones too. No ancient records document the removal of the Benben stones, but their absence in all surviving Old Kingdom pyramids speaks to a slow dismantling over time, a fading away of the divine point that once crowned a monument to eternity. But I do think we can end on an optimistic note. If we take the comedic worldview and see these Benben capped obelisks as their cosmic batteries, filling the lands with this divine creator god energy, as these timeless testaments of the physical achievements of the Kemites, while also being inscribed with texts that simultaneously show us the minds of these people in their richly integrated and philosophically profound, human positive teachings, this worldview was maintained, it was perpetuated in areas like Rome, London, and New York, some of, if not the most influential cities of the modern era. Cultures which fought Isfet, or chaos, in ways that I think would have made the good gods and pharaohs proud. Perhaps overcorrecting in times and trying to shake off their shackles to the desert god Set, but nonetheless, these cities were pinnacles of a culture that found ways to push advancements in philosophy and technology, reaching new peaks that had not been seen since the time that those Benben capstones were upon the Great Pyramids, thousands of years before. In fact, the Pyramid of Khufu was the tallest structure in the world for over 3,800 years, originally standing at 146.5 meters or 481 feet tall, finally being surpassed by the Lincoln Cathedral in England. Of course, like with the Egyptian cultural dominance or the current influence of the Anglosphere, there are many things that we could critique, many ways that these people fell short of their own ideals, and we need to learn from the past. As Herodotus famously described the Egyptians, saying, quote, "They are religious excessively beyond all other men." But now the modern European cultural influences might be described as the opposite. We are irreligious excessively beyond all other men, with a sterile, materialistic view of reality, completely opposite of the view where Atum or Ta was animating all things, from a view of afterlife transformation of the six-part soul into the divine seventh part, becoming the Akh, or effective spirit being able to help others in this world. It's now become the modern view that with death, that there is nothing that awaits us but the primordial nothingness of Nun. And to put some Egyptian symbolism on it, I think this overcorrection is a product of the lie as well. Another manipulation of Isfet, leading to disorder, and ultimately, even though those Enlightenment philosophers thought they were getting away from that desert god, away from Set, this unhealthy view only helps to serve the god of chaos even more. So us moderns can gain a lot by meditating on the meaning of the Benben and just how tragic and symbolic it is that they are lost.